everybody. Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 453. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, what's going on, bud? How you doing?
I'm doing pretty well.
How's your day? Did you have a good day or a bad day?
I had a good day. I just started working out again, which is good, but the downside is that I just got demolished today. So,
oh yeah. Tomorrow, it's not even the next day, it's the day after that really nabs you, right? Yeah, man. Every time I don't play basketball for a while and then I go and I think I'm fine, it's all good. It's been a couple weeks, but I'm good. And then I'm like, oh, I got pretty tired. And then 2 days later, I'm like, oh my God. You'll be good though. It comes back. You just got to stick with it. That's cool, man. Good for you. Maybe you'll inspire our listeners as well. Or maybe me.
We'll see about that.
All right. So this is the M19 Sealed episode. We also have a short primer, high points, I would call it, for the Pro Tour Cube on Magic Online. For those of you that like to draft the cubes on Magic Online, the latest iteration is out, and we'll be talking about that at the end of the show, or after the sealed portion. Before we get into all that, though, of course, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. Whatever it is that your little magical heart desires, you will find it at channelfireball.com. They got a full selection of singles and sealed products, as well as supplies, apparel, and of course, the best free content on the web. That's right. You can go there and watch videos from some of the best players in the world so that you can learn by sitting right over their shoulder and seeing them make decisions in real time, just as they would if they were playing at a GP or the Pro Tour, except for that they get to tell you what they're thinking, where they can't do that there. That is invaluable advice for people looking to get better at Magic, and we know that that's why you're here. So just another one of the great reasons to visit channelfireball.com. Also, the show is brought to you by you via the Patreon. That's a great website that allows people to give back to the creators that help make their life a little better. And we're on there. Been on there for a while now, and it's a big part of how content creation works these days. And we encourage you to check them out. One of the perks that you get for being a patron of the show is you get access to the Patreon feed, which lets you submit questions for the Patreon question of the week, which we have right now from Peter, who says, hey guys, I've been drafting with a casual group of colleagues 4 to 5 times per set since Aether Revolt released, but I've never been to FNM or such events. A group of us are planning on hitting up the pre-release when it rolls around this fall. As someone who's at least decent at Limited, but not familiar with pre-release etiquette or protocol, what advice would you give to a store event first timer? Cheers. Love the show. Thanks, Peter. What do you think, Luis? What if you had never gone to one of these events before, what are the things that you need to know?
For the most part, I think you can just listen to like the judge's instructions, and you're not going to end up in too complicated of a situation. Like, they're going to tell you when to open your packs and when to start deck building. You can ask questions of the people around you or the judge. And for sure, don't be afraid to call a judge. Like a lot of people, especially when they're new to these kind of situations, see calling a judge as like someone did something wrong. But that's just not true. Judges are just supposed to help you play the game of Magic the best possible. Like, they're trying to help you make the game go smoothly. So if you have a rules question, you can call a judge, and that's completely fine. Also, pre-releases people tend to be pretty relaxed. You really shouldn't stress about it. Like, I would say the pre-release is the best time to, allow small takebacks, let your opponents kind of like play, like just try to be nice when you're playing at the pre-release. You're playing against a lot of people who this is their first exposure to an in-store tournament. If you act like a jerk, they won't come back. So I think that you shouldn't worry about that. For my experience, I used to go to pre-releases all the time. I've missed very few in all the years I've played Magic. And even when I was a newer player, pre-releases were pretty welcoming. So I'd like to keep that, trend continuing. And honestly, if you're just ready to show up and play and have a good attitude, you're going to be fine. These are not a scary thing. Well,
no, and
I know they can't be.
They can be, but they really shouldn't. And the other thing to keep in mind, Peter, is that these pre-releases, they're designed for you. They're designed for people to come out and experience Magic, often for the first time. Now, you do need to know the rules of the game. If you literally had no clue about the rules, that wouldn't be a great experience because you do need to play some matches. But as long as you're even rudimentally familiar, you will find a slot for yourself at the pre-release, and it'll be good. So absolutely go. You should totally go. And then if you feel comfortable with that, head out to an FNM as well and start working your way up the chain, because I got to say that's where things really take off for a certain mindset of player, right? You get into the tournament scene and you start getting that, and it's really rewarding.
I mean, I'm one of the more veteran, most veteran players you can be, right? Like I played all the tournaments all the way up the chain, and the way I got into it was I would go to my local shop for Wednesday night drafts. That turned into going for Wednesday night drafts and Friday night drafts. That turned into someone saying like, "Hey, you should come to a PTQ," and it just kind of snowballed from there. If the people I played at the local store hadn't been friendly and it hadn't been fun, I may have never played in a Pro Tour.
I didn't know you back then, but didn't you actually have a pretty long stretch where you would be described as like a casual player?
Oh, yeah. I learned how to play Magic in 1993, and the first PTQ I played at was in 2003.
Wow. So a really long stretch.
Yeah, I didn't play a competitive tournament. Like I played in some tournaments. Actually, I won a pack of Arabian Nights in a sealed tournament in like '96. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was great too because the store had 2 packs. I got to choose which one I wanted, and I opened a Library of Alexandria. So
holy crap! Are you serious?
Oh yeah, dead serious. It was like a 4th edition sealed deck. It was awesome. But anyway.
Oh man, nice flip.
Yeah, I didn't play in tournaments, and like I was in the same position Peter was in, where I'd done a lot of casual gaming with friends, and at some point decided, hey, I'm going to go to a tournament. And, I think the way I see your role as an experienced Magic player is I think you should be an ambassador for people who are trying to get deeper into the game, because, I mean, this is the greatest game ever made. And it's pretty hard to kind of understand how all the different complexity things and the social nuances and all those things. So I don't know, just be welcoming and try to understand this is a hard game to play, and people will make mistakes and do things wrong, but that doesn't mean you should have a bad time.
Yeah, I actually wrote an article once about this because I tried to appeal to the gamer mentality side of kind of the spike players, right? About being nice and accommodating to newer players. And the reasoning is simple. As long as you have an ecosystem in your local area where people actually are playing Magic, then you get to keep on playing tournaments and having new players come in and maybe even beating them if you've put in the effort. But I've been to stores that had weekly drafts that died. Like just a few people moved away, and then somebody got a job, and then, they were kind of just on the brink. And next thing you know, they didn't hit critical mass for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, where it was like, we've only got 3 people. We've only got 4. Yeah, there's not another draft again. And boom, people go to other stores, they go to other areas, or they just stop playing. And I'll tell you what, you take it for granted, that it could be the difference between 1 or 2 players at your shop. And, you're really nice to that person that comes in and say, hey, come on in. This is a place where you belong and where we're going to learn together and have fun. And yeah, I'm better than you right now, but you might be able to track me down with enough work. And then those drafts can keep going. And boy, I'll tell you, it hits you like a ton of bricks when you see your local game store kind of dry up like that. And it happens more often, I think, than people realize. So a lot of incentive to be a good person in this case, not that you needed more than just the face value. Let's do our crack-a-pack. Luis, I used my last pack to draft earlier this week. So what I've done is I've committed the ultimate sin. I opened a pack for no value on Magic Online just for our listeners. And I've got the screenshot of it sitting in front of me. So our first card is, or should I make some paper noises just for the, smells good. Wall of Vines, green for an 0-3 with Defender Reach. I don't even know if I brought this in out of the board. Maybe I did once.
It just has no place. It doesn't block a lot of the common flyers. Like, it's not effective against Pegasus Scorcher because that comes with a friend. It doesn't block Snapping Drake, even Wind Mage. Like, Wall of Vines, I think, is just a brick.
Yeah, it is. The only time I've ever seen it be good is when Woody drafted that Arcades deck. And he had like 3 of these and a bunch of Wall of Mist, and he went off. Yeah. Walking Corpse, which I have to admit, you don't see it on the battlefield often, 1 in a black for a 2/2 zombie. And somebody played it, or somebody mentioned it to me, and I was like, is that in this set? Or is that one of those extra cards that they don't actually leave? Like, you think I should know. I've probably done 60 drafts of the format, but yeah, just not really on my radar, apparently.
The biggest reason to play this is if you have one of the zombie payoffs. The second biggest is if you have an aggressive deck and you just need a 2-drop. But in either case, you should not be taking this early.
Yeah. Next is Viashino Pyromancer, 1 in a red for 2/1, and it does 2 damage when it ETBs. That guy's been seeing decent amount of play and putting in a little work. Yeah,
this is a fine card in the red-white aggro deck, but you can pick them up kind of for free. Like
Yeah, for
your
sure.
deck is never make or break based on how many Vishino Pyromancers you have.
No, here's a good card against the Pyromancer. Skeleton Archer, 3 and a black for a 3/3. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to deal 1 damage to any target. And there's actually a significant number of targets that it actually kills. Thopters, Pyromancer, the Drill Master. There's a bunch of stuff that it takes out. And the 3/3 that it leaves behind also tends to at least trade for a good number of options as well. I found a Skeleton Archer to be a pretty good utility card in my decks playing black.
I've been impressed with it. It kind of does the job, and it's alongside there. It feels like there's a decent amount of ways to punish 1 toughness creatures. So I'm not like in a huge hurry. Like, we're sneak peek. We're going to see an Elvish Rejuvenator later in the pack that also punishes 2/1s. Aviation Pioneer also punishes 2/1s. So that makes Archer a little worse because there's so many ways to punish the X1s. The X1s get played a little bit less, but it's still a fine card, and it's the pick right now.
Yeah, somehow our next, a little later, there's 3 cards in a row that just jack up 1 toughness creatures. Next one's also performed well, though. It's Gearsmith Guardian, 5 mana, 3/5. But if you have a blue creature, it's a 5/5 instead.
Gearsmith Guardian's good. You don't need to take it early because it feels like it almost always wheels. But it's a way for blue to actually compete on the ground with the other colors. And it's nice that it's like the reverse payoff, right? Where it cares about blue cards and it's an artifact, because there's a lot of blue cards that care about artifacts, and it's a way to kind of bolster that whole synergy there. I would still probably take Skeleton Archer over it, though.
I would too. Yeah. Fire Elemental, 3 red for a 5/4. Really been unimpressed by Fire Elemental. I basically never want it. Even when I want 4 power creatures or higher, I find better ones than the Elemental.
I have not really played Fire Elemental. The biggest reason I think to play it is if you have Sarkhan's Unsealing in your deck.
Yeah, definitely. And even then, I just end up getting a Thornhide Wolf.
I'd rather have a Bristling Boar, or Thornhide Wolves. I find 4/5 would be much stronger than 5/4.
Definitely. All right, so let's get rid of these 2/1s, because here's Elvish Rejuvenator, which you mentioned. The next one up is Daybreak Chaplain. So 1/3 lifelink, another one that's good against 2/1s. And Aviation Pioneer as well. 2 and a blue, 1/2 that gives you a Thopter as well. I like the Pioneer here.
I like these cards. I think taking the Pioneer is justifiable here. I like Elvish Rejuvenator a lot. I found to be very strong in your like green rampish decks. But I think you can take Pioneer or Rejuvenator to start with. But I would probably lean towards taking Pioneer because it's just great in every deck, and even comes with an artifact for the cards that care about that. Whereas the Rejuvenator falls off a little if you end up with more 3s and 4s instead of 5s and 6s.
Right. Anticipate. This one's kind of lived up to the billing that we described it in the set review, which is that it's a fine card. It's just it very rarely makes the cut for me. I just have a hard time finding room for Anticipate. I just want Divination more often.
Divination is much better than Anticipate.
Yeah, it's just much better.
It's not even close. Anticipate is basically filler. You play if you don't have enough 2s, or if you have like an Enigma Drake and a couple other spells matter cards, and you just need to fluff out your spell category. But Anticipate is basically just air.
Rise from the Grave, 4 and a black. You get a creature card from any graveyard and put it on to the battlefield under your control. It's also black and a zombie.
It's just fine.
I don't prioritize it. I'll say that.
No, I don't prioritize it. I'm going to talk about this later. This definitely goes in my gets better in sealed category. But
oh yeah, for sure.
In draft, I find it just to be fine. It's not even that much better than the classic Raise Dead, something like Macabre Waltz, because you're not that often going to get back a creature that costs so much that you're getting a huge mana advantage. The biggest thing about Rise is it can take from your opponent's graveyard. So you can kill their creature and replay it with Rise. Got to watch out against blue decks, though. And then bouncing the creature you got from their graveyard is pretty bad for you.
Oh, I've had that happen. I've also done it, though. All right, here's a real card. Now, this is a quality Magic card. Lightning Strike, 1 and a red, 3 damage to anything at instant speed. There's our winner so far.
So I think that Lightning Strike is not like the best uncommon, but it's almost always going to be hard to argue against taking it because it's so flexible. It just goes great in every deck. Blue-red spells, red-green monsters, red-white aggro, and it's going to be hard to knock this one off of the first pick. Yeah,
the efficiency is just there. Next is Brawl Bash Ogre, 2 black-red for a 3/3 with Menace, and when it attacks, you can sack another creature. If you do, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn.
I like this card, but I would not first pick it over a monocolored card that's better. So
yeah, me too.
I mean, Brawl Bash Ogre, gold is a negative modifier, not a positive one.
Yeah, and I've noticed though, like Black Red has not been high on my list of archetypes that I go after, even though Brawl Bash Ogre's a pretty reasonable payoff for it and a card that I respect. It doesn't pull me in quite enough to make me think, okay, here we go. And the whole I'm going to steal your creature and then sacrifice a thing hasn't proven to be a consistent strategy in M19. So Brawl Bash Ogre took a little bit of a hit, even though it's still a fine card, for the mana. Our rare Graveyard Marshal. Boom, that's me. I'm grumpy. Oh, yeah. Black for a 3/2, and it's a zombie. And you can pay 2 and a black and exile a creature card from your graveyard to get a 2/2 black zombie tapped on the battlefield.
This card's good. It's great. Yeah, it's good. Any black deck has those zombie synergies, gives you a lot of late game gas while being a aggressive 2-drop, even if it's a little hard to cast. Yeah, still not Lightning Strike, though.
Agreed.
I'm just going to take Lightning Strike out of this pack, and I think it's actually pretty bad if you don't. As much as I like Marshall, it's not the pick.
yeah. I'm second pick in this pack for sure. Lightning Strike is head and shoulders above the rest. Okay, so let's get into M19 Sealed here, Luis. What are you've been doing a fair bit of these? What are some of the things that have stood out?
So some of this stuff's going to sound similar to what we usually say in the Sealed episode. I mean, part of it is like Sealed does tend to be slower and tend to, want you to play stuff like main deck naturalizes. But what I find interesting is how big the difference between Sealed and Draft is for M19, and how it changes the value of some of the like sets themes, which I actually like M19 Sealed a decent amount. So one of the things I like to do is look at what are some of the base characteristics of the Sealed decks that you should be building, and what do they end up looking like? So the first one is I find myself playing 18 lands more often than 17, just because you end up having a fairly high curve and card draw. Card draw actually pushes you to want to play slightly more lands, because once you hit your third land drop for divination, you're unlikely to miss more, and you're not going to get too flooded if you have like divination and sift in your deck. Right. Cards like Elvish Rejuvenator and Manolith sometimes let you play 17. But I would say most decks really do want 18. Okay.
Most of the decks that you're looking to try to play, right? Like these are, maybe not ideal, but the types of decks that you actually like versus making a compromise or something like that.
Yeah. And so the other thing is I tend to want to draw first. There are some exceptions to this. One is that if you have multiple divinations or effects like that, you actually do kind of want to play first, because divination on the draw makes you discard. The other is if you're lacking in cheap removal or early blockers, stuff like Omen Speaker, Druid of the Cowl, Shock, basically cards that, Wall of Mist, cards that you could play in the first couple turns. If you're too short on those cards, then you're going to end up wanting to play first a little bit more often, even though I think the default is still going to be draw. And there's some matchups where you might switch that, because it is possible to build aggro decks and Sealed, even though it is the minority.
So what is it? What would, if your default is draw, what are you looking for on the other side? Like just a curve out deck? If they're just looking to go 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, are you like, let's back
if I
this
see them
up again?
Playing red white and are trying to play like a 2-drop into a Bogart Brute, I'm probably going to want to just play first.
Okay. So it's close.
It is close. But in general, I think in the dark, I would choose to draw.
Okay.
Another really big difference between Sealed and Draft is that blue gets quite a bit better in Sealed. And it's actually for multiple reasons. So one is that the counter spells get much better. Essence Scatter, Cancel, and Bone to Ash are all highly playable. Your opponent's going to have good cards to counter. They're going to have high-end cards. And Bone to Ash is a 2-for-1, right? It does draw you a card.
Oh, yeah.
So you're going to end up in a spot where having a card like Cancel is just such a good backstop against them playing like the Laughless, the Dragon Queen, or them playing, any card that costs 5 or more that's good. And more often people are going to have those cards because it's Sealed, and because Sealed pushes you to play your good, expensive cards all the time.
Yeah. You can actually turn a reasonable mana profit with Cancel, which a lot of times you can't, and a lot of times you're taking on this massive risk of them not playing anything and you having left 3 mana fallow. And here it just gives you this insurance policy, because they are going to play things that cost 5, 6, and even 7 mana.
Well, if someone opens an Elder Dragon, there's a pretty good chance it's in their pool. Of course, Chromium is uncounterable, but the rest of them, the Cancel is quite good. And then the other thing that really pushes you towards playing blue is that the artifact theme is really well supported because every pool has like 2 to 5, 2 to 6 playable artifacts. You're going to end up with like Manolith and a Sky Scanner, one random like rare artifact maybe, or an good uncommon artifact like
Give
the
me that
Tome.
Encyclopedia, baby.
Right, yeah, the Arcane Encyclopedia. There's just a like Transmogrifying Wand. There's just a lot of good artifacts, and it's pretty easy to have a couple of them. So it just means that your Scholar of Stars and your skilled animators get just a decent amount better. Your the blue-white engineer that's a 4/4 flyer. Like these are all cards that you're more likely to be able to play because in Sealed you just get a couple artifacts, in every pool.
Mm-hmm.
That of course leads to the next step, which is you should play your artifact and enchantment removal main deck. Invoke the Divine and Naturalize are great. I would play 2 of them main deck because you're playing against, first of all, a lot of artifacts. Second of all, Luminous Bonds and Dwindle and Patient Rebuilding and Psychic Corrosion. There's just a lot of, good enchantment. Sarkhan's Unsealing. There's a lot of good targets for these. Reclamation Sage itself is just a bomb. Like, it's a card that really does push me to want to play green.
Yeah, you get targets a lot of the time, and sometimes they're the important ones that you just mentioned.
Oh, for sure. They're among the better cards in your opponent's deck. And killing them mid-combat, killing a Luminous Bonds mid-combat and blocking their Snapping Drake with your Giant Spider, is a pretty big swing.
Oh, yeah.
The one I'm actually not sure about is Smelt. And the reason I haven't played this card main deck is, first of all, I find red to be pretty weak in Sealed. I think the Sultai colors are much better than red and white just because, it makes sense, right? Those are the 2 most aggressive colors. So they're going to end up being less represented in Sealed.
Yeah, they demand a specific subset of cards to be good, where you're not always going to get that.
Right. And of course, you can always open good rares and removal in any color. So it's not like you never play these. But you do play red a little less, so I've had less opportunities to want to play Smelt. The other thing is I think it's still too narrow. Not killing enchantments is such a big difference that I think Smelt is actually a sideboard card, but it seems like a pretty good sideboard card. I think you bring it in a decent amount of the time.
Okay. Yeah, I have yet to do that. You mentioned it, but a lot of the bombs that you mentioned were enchantments, and then also the better end of the removal, the Luminous Bonds and the Dwindles. Being able to kill those is super critical, I think, to make those viable main deck cards.
Yeah, so, you like Hieromancer's Cage, right? An uncommon.
Yeah,
like
Cage, yeah.
There's a lot. The next part you'll like, since we talked about Psychic Corrosion. Mill is actually quite good.
Ooh, I like that.
Psychic Corrosion is, well, in reverse order, from top to bottom, Patient Rebuilding is the best one. It doesn't even really count as Mill, since Patient Rebuilding might just be the best card to open and Sealed.
It's so awesome. Yeah, the Mill part is of course how you end up winning most of the time, but that's not really the important part, right?
No.
Like, it's not a Mill card. It's a game plan in one card.
So if you open Patient Rebuilding, it should go in your deck. Like, you should jump through hoops to play it. Psychic Corrosion, quite strong. There are decks, like you said, they're going to have a lot of trouble beating it. And this, of course, goes double for Sealed decks. And then even the old favorite Millstone. Like, this is much worse because it requires a mana investment every turn. But I remember one of the first Sealeds that Pat Cox did. He sends me his pool. He's this like blue-black control deck. He says, should I play Millstone? I'm like, I'm not sure, but just try it. And then he comes back to me a couple hours later. He's like, okay, well, I went 5-0 and I won like half my matches off Millstone. Just
oh my God.
Control mirrors, and my opponents couldn't kill it with anything and could definitely not outrace it. So it's like, okay. And that has been my my experience as well. I've had a positive experience playing Millstone. It's so cool because like they have a card like Arcane Encyclopedia, right? The 3 mana artifact, 3 tap draw card. And that's a great card. I would always play this card in Sealed. When your opponent plays that and you play a Millstone, you don't really feel that bad about that exchange.
Yeah, you're like, you keep doing it, keep pumping that tempo in those cards. And what are there decks that you wouldn't want to play Millstone in?
Aggressive decks that are actually attacking your opponent's life total. It's not great. It's not great if you don't have removal, because Millstone is trying to set you up to win on turn 15. Turn 13. It's not a turn 7 kill card. So if you don't have removal, sometimes you'll just get the game to turn 10 or 11, but they'll play their 5/5 flyer or their Horizon Scholar, and all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm still going to die to that. I don't like it as much in the green ramp decks, because those tend to look to ramp until they're like, Colossal Dreadmaw, Palaka Worm sort of things. And that's the way you're going to win the game. Your finishers are actual win conditions, not just a bunch of removal spells and card draw. Where it's best is in something like blue-black or blue-red control or blue-white control. Notice blues in a lot of these. I think you're going to play blue a lot in Sealed.
Yeah, for sure. One of the interesting... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it's sometimes like black-white control. Like basically these like removal-based control decks that want a win condition.
Yeah, for sure. And especially the ones that have some type of repeatable card draw. The interesting thing that you'll note, by the way, when you play a card like Psychic Corrosion or Millstone, less so with Patient Rebuilding because it's such an extreme case of this, but with the lesser two, is that it does completely change your game plan once you have it on the battlefield, where you go, okay, I have Psychic Corrosion. My game plan is now to mill you. I'm just never going to attack you again, like under any threat at all. Like if it's literally free, you go for it. But beyond that, you're just like, well, I'm not on that plan. I'm just here to block. Like why would I take any risk whatsoever? And the really interesting part is when your opponent does find a way to kill your Millstone, right? And I've been trying to hedge and think about this as I've had a Psychic Corrosion on the battlefield about what happens if this game plan does not come to fruition. Like let's say my opponent's on green, right? And there's a reasonable chance at least that they have a Naturalize or a Reclamation Sage in their deck somewhere, and they may draw it if I don't end up milling it. And I try to look at myself and my board state and say, what could I do? What should I do to make sure that if that happens, I haven't just sunk every resource I have into this game plan and I have no other way to recover from it. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, you're on that plan. I mean, when I do it, I'm like, well, this is what I'm doing, right? I'm on this plan, so off I go.
I mean, Millstone is kind of like lava spiking your opponent, where, that's just 1 mana deal 3 to their face. Like when you fall short, you didn't get a whole lot out of it.
Right.
Like if you play Millstone and use it 5 times, mill your opponent for 10 cards, but then they kill it with 8 cards left in their deck and they have a 6/6 in play, like you're just going to die to it. And it doesn't matter whether they have 8 cards or 80 cards. So you do have to keep in mind that like, this is a high investment strategy. And that's one of the reasons Psychic Corrosion is much better. First of all, it's faster because at worst it's the same as Millstone, but it can often be better when you're divinating and sifting.
Yes, especially Sift. Oh my God.
You're right. And then it also takes no mana each turn. So if they kill it, you didn't put nearly as many resources. The mill for 10 example, you sunk 10 extra mana into Millstone, right?
Yeah.
You activate it 5 times. So that is a very big impact on your game.
The other thing that I've done is really try to make sure that I think about really, really hard about what I want to use my counter spells on, specifically cancel. It can be really tempting to cancel like a really strong creature on their side that you'd really just rather not deal with. But sometimes it is worth it to try to say, okay, well, I've got a quadruple block on that, and I can protect that block with a cancel if I really need to. I think I'm going to take the risk and do that rather than counter it, because again, if they just untap and go, oh, Naturalize your Psychic Corrosion or whatever, you're like, wow, my whole entire game plan just fell apart. So just be scrupulous about that, because you do need to try to protect that game plan when possible. I mean, yeah, you do what you got to do. And the fact is that a lot of decks don't have answers to it in the main, right? And you play a Psychic Corrosion and they just look at their hand and like, well, that's sticking on the battlefield the whole time. And then you can just kind of work.
Unless you're playing Sealed and they main deck their Invoke the Divine, because
yeah. But I mean, even then, like some people just don't,
So another thing to look at in Sealed is what cards in general go up in value, and this is this kind of stuff you'll hear for most Sealed formats, like cards like Flyers, expensive cards, Artifact, Enchant Removal, and Counter Spells. Right, these are the cards we just talked about.
Yeah.
What's also interesting is what cards go down in value, and cheap aggressive creatures and pump spells are like the big losers, where you're just not as much into your Viashino Pyromancers, right? And your Bogart Brutes and your Titanic Growths, because you're just going to end up in a lot of games that aren't decided by that, and your opponent's going to have an easy time stalling you out, because one of the reasons is you can build a seal that looks like it's a decent aggro deck, but you always notice, I'm just a couple short on 2 drops. Yeah, that's why you're not building a good aggro deck. It's because you lay out all your cards for sealed, you're red aggro deck, and you're like, well, I'd rather have 7 2-drops, right? 6 to 7 2-drops is great in a draft. But I have 3. But I have the rest of the cards. I have the removal, the pump spells, the decent 3s and 4s, and it's like, well, you don't have all the 2s, and that's why your aggro deck is just gonna falter when they kill your first creature. because you're not going to be on the board. The creature that you play on turn 2 gets 3 hits in if you then start trading off cards at 3 or more mana. Whereas if you don't start till turn 3 and then they kill it or play a blocker, if you kill it, they're taking 3. They're not taking 5.
Right.
So really be wary about building the aggressive decks. Though I got juked pretty well. I had a really insane match. Actually, one of the first seals I did, which I recorded, was where I beat my opponent's 5-color control deck in game 1 with Chaos Wand, and then in game 3, we went to game 3, and they ended up siding into red-white aggro and just running me over.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
that's a nice
that was a good juke. It also worked better online because you can't tell what they're doing online, whereas in paper, sometimes you can tell, okay, they're swapping out 19 cards. What's going on over there?
Right. I'm gonna anticipate something more aggressive, where online you're just at their mercy.
So the last bit about sealed is I want to take a look at some cards that are specifically much better in sealed. Okay. The top of the list is for sure Chaos Wand. Actually, I just mentioned, just because everyone builds all these removal decks. Remember to use against blue decks, especially use Chaos Wand in response to their spells. Try to hit a counterspell. Kind of keep a mental inventory. It's good to write down the cards you hit, especially in earlier games. So in game 2 or 3, you have a better sense of what's going on. Wands are very good in sealed. So Transmogrifying Wand also very good. Making things into Oxen is quite strong, especially when you can often blank them with, if you have an Omen Speaker out, you can turn one of their things into an Ox, and it doesn't even matter. Likewise,
and by the way, I found that card to be super, super good because everybody runs all their bombs, and you're really downgrading some serious power with that thing.
Oh yeah, that card is great. Switcheroo is also pretty sweet. This is the 4 and a blue. You swap control of creatures because you can often give them an Elvish Rejuvenator or something, Aviation Pioneer, something dorky, and take whatever giant dragon or Gin of Wishes that they ended up playing.
Totally. That card feels a little slow if you face red-white, especially since a lot of their stuff's redundant. But boy, switch over to Sealed Deck and all of a sudden that thing goes up a lot.
Yeah, I've splashed for Switcheroo. I had a red-green deck that had double Rejuvenator and had Druid of the Cowl and had just, good red and green removal, but I just splashed for a couple of blue cards, one of which was Switcheroo. Black gets a couple of spells that get a lot better. Liliana's Contract, the 3 black, lose 4 life, draw 4 cards, and then some unintelligible text about demons. But basically paying 4 life to draw 4 cards is a lot stronger in sealed.
Yeah, the full reload, absolutely. And again, you're less likely to get punished by the red-white menace. Rise
from the Grave also gets a lot better because you have more removal to play with most of the time, and your opponent's going to have good cards, so you're going to be able to steal those. Though, like I mentioned earlier, against blue decks, really watch out. You don't want to be going too deep on Rise from the Grave against their stuff, because if they just have a bounce spell, and Disperse is a fine card to play, Exclusion Mage, whatever, you'll end up giving them back their best creature.
Okay, so question then. You have Rise from the Grave in your deck game 1. You don't draw it. Your opponent disperses your creature, at some point. You go to sideboarding. Are you looking to just take out Rise from the Grave just based on that?
If I have good creatures, I'm not likely to, but you also have to look at what removal you're playing against. If you play against someone with Luminous Bonds, Dwindle, Hieromancer's Cage, all of a sudden, or Hierophant's Cage, it's a lot less appealing because their effects aren't doing as much to put stuff in your graveyard.
Okay. So, but it's not enough for you to have seen a bounce spell.
No, I would generally need a little bit more than that. Okay. I would just keep that in mind and probably not steal their creature. But
yeah, that's a good point too. If you have a close decision, even if theirs is a little better, right, you should default back to yours just in case if you're playing against blue. Okay.
Spark Tongue Dragon gets a lot better.
Sparky.
Though again, still red tends to be one of my main colors. But if you end up with the double Electrify, Spark Tongue Dragon, shock pool, all of a sudden, yeah, sure, you can run red. And this card is good because it gives you a good mana sink while still being a relevant play early. Colossal Majesty I found to be quite effective in the green ramp decks. It's just a way to grind out the opponent, who has a bunch of removal spells, because all of a sudden they have to start using their Lich's Cresses on your bristling boars, whereas a lot of what these blue-black decks want to do is play a good blocker to keep your 2 through 4 drops at bay, and then just use their removal on your best creatures. Something like Colossal Majesty all of a sudden makes any creature with 4 power a must kill. And that really does shift how the game plays out. Manolith and Gifted Paradise are also good because often you're going to want to be 3 colors. The dual lands you get are important too, right? You get these end of the battlefield tap duels. You have Manalith, you have Gift of Paradise. Elvish Rejuvenator is not really that great of a way to fix a 3rd color, but it still just gives you extra looks at that land. And you're often going to end up with a pool where you can just splash off-color removal spells. So I would say about half the time I end up splashing, maybe a little bit more. It really depends. Like basically, let's say you wanted to be, blue-black, classic good combination, and you have an Electrifier too, and then you also have a Highland Lake in a Manalith. At that point, it becomes pretty appealing to splash the red. So what lands you get are really going to impact how often you splash, like something like Luminous Bonds or what have you.
Yeah, when I lay out my sealed pool for this format, I have a pile where Manaliths and dual lands and the Dragon's Horde or whatever it's called.
The rare Manalith.
Yeah. I have a pile where those go while I'm just, roughly sorting out my colors, just so that I have an idea for what kind of fixing I have that could go into any deck.
And you end up often utilizing that. Like it's gonna really, because what'll happen a lot of the time too is you'll have like one color you're gonna play, right? Like you opened a Bone Dragon, double Lich's Crest, Strangling Spores, and like 2 other good black cards. You're like, okay, I'm a lock to play black. These like 9 or 10 black cards are in my deck no matter what.
Yep.
But then you're looking, I'm like, well, do we want to have blue or white as my secondary color? There's pros and cons for both. And then you look and you're like, oh, I've got, multiple Forsaken Sanctuaries, the black-white tap land. Like, okay, that really does give the nod towards playing white.
Yeah, especially, and you'll quickly figure out which cards you routinely will be able to splash for. Like Luminous Bonds is one of the most commonly splashed for common removal spells, along with like cards like Electrify. Basically, any of the single mana color removal spells you'll see quite often on a splash.
Yeah, and then that's why I keep mentioning like cards like Electrify, Luminous Bonds, Strangling Spores. These are all the kind of cards that you're going to see over and over and over again. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned the Elder Dragons earlier, but those are common 3-color splashes. Yeah.
Another card that gets better is Recollect, the Tuna Green. Return a card from a graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, I actually like it in Sealed. It's a little slow for draft, but...
the thing is, it's not only a little slower for draft. Sealed, you have more bombs than in draft because Sealed, you open 6 packs to get a first pick, whereas in draft, like no one's passing you, or very rarely are they going to pass you like an Elder Dragon or a Patient Rebuilding or whatever really high heat card there is in the pack. In Sealed, you get more shots at that, so a card like Recollect just does naturally get better.
Yeah, and it also fights the fights that we're advocating going to battle with. For example, you say Arcane Encyclopedia, they say cancel it, and that's a major play in the game. If 2 turns later you draw, your Recollect, and you go, Recollect, get back my Arcane Encyclopedia, your opponent has major problems. Like there are multiple single cards that can completely change how the game goes that aren't even the mythic rare bombs that we're used to having that be. Cards like the Arcane Encyclopedia is one of them. And then other cards too that we've been talking about, like some of these mill cards, for example, right? Like in the right matchup, you go Psychic Corrosion, and if they go cancel it or if they duress it from you or whatever, and later on you get it back, they're in big trouble. Like those type of cards are really hard to get rid of twice because they require either a niche card like the Artifact or Enchantment Removal or Hand Disruption or a counterspell. And they just don't have that many of those. And if you just recollect it back and play it, like there's a good chance that they have no more outs in their entire deck for it. And you get to free roll all of those bombs that I was sort of overlooking here. Sure, you can also get back your Palladium Ores or whatever it is too. So as long as you have the time to do it, which I think you do in Sealed, that card actually has a lot more utility where a single card can completely change the outcome.
Yeah, and you do have to watch out, right? Like we're saying, like, yeah, put in these like slower cards, put in these 4 mana counter spells, these Recollects and Sifts and Arcane Encyclopedias. Like at some point, you do need to have cards that will stop your opponent from killing you, but you generally will have enough of those, and Recollect is one of the ways to get an advantage out of having those and going to the late game.
Yes.
Speaking of which, of course, Arcane Encyclopedia, a good addition to any sealed deck.
Oh, I love it, man.
I would play this one.
You win so many games off that card. It's just
you
insane.
do, and you can. It happens in draft, but it happens to an even higher degree in sealed. Suspicious Bookcase is an interesting one because this is the 2 mana 0/4 So it does keep your opponent from killing you early with their whatever incidental creatures they have. And then later in the game, it starts making your creatures unblockable and just slipping through. So I've been happy enough to play one of these. I don't like to play multiples usually. It just ends up too many do-nothings, but having one of these has helped out.
I agree. Also, it's an artifact, and it does, fulfill that requirement for when you need it.
So,
do you think this is a good sealed format? We're kind of wrapping this, but I'm just curious if you've enjoyed it or whatever.
I have. I've actually enjoyed it more than Draft, and I think it's because it feels like a lot of the synergy decks don't quite get there in Draft anyway. Like when I've tried to draft the Active Trees and Red-Black deck or the Artifact Blue deck, like sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it doesn't really come together. Sometimes it just feels like I'm drafting a deck of those colors that have 3 synergy cards total in them. And for some reason, the sealeds have just been really interesting to build because you're splashing so often and because there's a lot of customization you can do. And this is another part that goes into this sealed format. And really, every sealed format is you should switch colors probably like 2 out of 5 rounds or something along those lines.
Okay.
Like sometimes you just have the nut red-black deck and it's just like no other colors close, you're fine. But often, the situation we talked about before where you're like, I'm definitely playing black, do I play blue or play white? That means that against some matchups, it's going to be better to switch to the other color. Like, oh, my removal lines up better against this player than this player. Like, I'd rather have luminous bonds than counterspells in this matchup. Or, oh, I really need these 2 Invoke the Divine, so I have to be playing white post board against this player. Yeah. Or you're like, I really need these double giant spider daggerback basilisk because I'm playing against like a bunch of snapping drakes and vine mares, and my blue black deck just can't beat those cards.
Right.
So
totally. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that part of the game, and I don't know. I have done a lot of sealeds and enjoyed this format a fair amount.
Yeah, it definitely has that inevitability feel, right? The one where you really want the repeatable mana sinks, the card draw, the stuff that happens over and over again. And that seems to be the way that a lot of these games end. Okay, let's take a quick look at the Pro Tour Cube. This is a new cube on Magic Online. It was designed by friend of the show, Eric Klug, and it includes cards that have been in decks that have won the Pro Tour, which is kind of a neat subset of cards. Now, he wrote a primer for it, and I'm going to give you kind of the high notes from it. I'll also put a link to it in the show notes if you want to read it yourself and get all the detailed information. But I kind of took the parts that I took away from it when I read it. And this is just so that you don't get sent into this new cube that you've never played before without any idea of some of the archetypes and what's going on. So here's some high hitters for that. First thing, he highlighted some of the archetypes in here that are beyond the normal stuff you'll see. He said, look, you've got green-based ramp, blue-based control, white-based aggro, red-based aggro. These are sort of common things that you'll see in cubes and, in fact, in just many formats in general. And he said they're here too. But some of the more specific archetypes that you can go for. One of them he outlined was an artifact deck, basically an affinity or artifact deck. And he said that there's actually 2 different types. And this is really important because they play much differently. So most of the Artifact Matters cards in the cube are blue and red, but there are some white ones that you'll want to keep your eye out for. And the decks break down into 2 different types. The first one is a control/combo with cards like Tinker, Metalworker, Tolarian Academy, and Goblin Welder. So these are cards that care about artifacts but are busted, right? Like Goblin Welder lets you get back an artifact from your graveyard by switching it for one on the battlefield. So if you can discard some 7-drop artifact, you can get it back by switching out some cheap artifact. Tolarian Academy is just a busted land that taps for mana for each artifact you control. Metalworker taps for 2 mana for each artifact in your hand. That can add up to 8 mana easily, and then you can just dump your whole hand on the battlefield. And then Tinker's one of the most busted cards ever. 2 and a blue, sack an artifact, and search your library for an artifact, put it on the battlefield. So that lets you, again, trade up, a mana rock or something like that for some huge, nasty payoff card. The other, though, type of artifact deck is much different, and it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of overlap strategically, though I'm sure there's cards that both decks want. And this is more like, think Modern Affinity, right? It isn't really a super affinity deck, but like that deck in Modern. So Arcbound Ravager, Cranial Plating, you get the artifact lands. That's right. They look just like basic lands, except for they're also artifacts. So you can sack them to Ravager, they pump up your plating, etc. So if you want that, you're talking about a fast, aggressive, kind of swarming style deck, much different than the one that we mentioned before.
Yeah, and this is the bigger departure from most cube decks. Like the Tinker Metalworker Academy Welder deck kind of exists in Legacy and Vintage Cube and is pretty good in both. The Arcbound Ravager Cranial Plating Artifact Lands thing is completely new. Yeah. So that one's a little different. And one of the things I like about that one specifically is no one else wants any of your cards. Like no one else wants Cranial Plating Arcbound Ravager. So totally. you can often end up like taking good cards, that everyone wants, right? Like your cards like, Preordain or Lightning Bolt or whatever, and then just wheeling the Ravager and the plating.
Yeah. So those are two different artifact-based archetypes that you should keep your eye out for. When it comes to tribal, there are two tribal decks in this cube. So it's weird, right? Because normally you will see often multiple different tribes in a cube that are well represented. In this one, because it's made of cards from decks that won the Pro Tour, there's actually only two that are really strong in this cube. And the first one is Zombies. And this is heavily populated by the standard deck that Jerry Thompson won Pro Tour Amonkhet with. So we've got cards like Crypt Breaker. These are much more recent, just a couple of years ago. Diregraph Colossus, Lord of the Accursed, Liliana's Mastery, if you remember that one. Metallic Mimic, which is, by the way, a card that goes into multiple decks here. Dark Salvation is in this cube. And then, if you want to go big, you can get the Scarab God and Grave Titan, the Gravey Train. So a full curve there of zombies, but it does look like it's, leaning pretty hard on Jerry T's deck overall.
It's kind of funny because you can see individual archetypes influenced by a specific tournament, specific deck. You'd have to note that this cube isn't literally every card that won a Pro Tour because, first of all, duplicates didn't make it in, right? There, Lightning Bolt's been in multiple PT winning decks, I'm sure. So is Lana Robes too. And Klug also trimmed the whole list. It's not just 2,000 cards. It's I think it's something along the...
It's 540.
It is the 540, yeah. So... it is tactical, right? You probably put all the Zombies Matters cards in because those don't get help from most decks, but you do end up with enough to draft an actual deck here.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you're going to be zombies, you're likely going to be either mono black or heavily in black, and you'll get the normal suite. And even if it's a little different than normal, you'll see many of the traditional cube cards of black removal and hand disruption as well. So keep an eye out for zombies. The other tribe is elves, thanks in no small part to you, Luis.
Yeah,
from your winning deck in 2008 in Berlin.
I'm responsible for Glimpse of Nature, a lot of the Heritage Druid type deals.
Which is kind of cool. But he did say in his article that it doesn't actually play out like a combo deck, that's how your deck played out at the Pro Tour that you won, right? It was a Elves combo.
Well, in game one, it was Elves combo with a Glimpse of Nature and eventually play a bunch of Elves and Grape Shot your opponent. In games 2 and 3, it tended to be an Umezawa's GTA aggro deck, but
Michaeloth aggro.
Yeah, I had a Michaeloth too. We had 4 GTAs on the sideboard. It was great. It is kind of neat, to seeing that I did influence this cube.
This is so cool, man.
It reminds me that I won matches, at some point in the past.
Whatever. Don't start that again. But so the point though is that it doesn't play out in that combo.
It's not a combo deck. No. I actually keep passing Glimpse. I've done a couple of these drafts, not like a million, but I think I'm 3 in or something.
Yeah, I've done 2.
I keep seeing Glimpse of Nature and being like, who's taking this card exactly? But the elf aggro part, this is influenced by Charles Gindy as well. He won a Pro Tour later that year playing elves, or earlier that year, actually. I don't remember. But he won a Pro Tour playing elves, but that was aggro elves with Imperious Perfect. And, you get new additions like Nissa and Metallic Mimic. So I think this is going to mostly be like the green ramp / beatdown deck that you're used to.
Yeah. Now, one of the cards that I wanted to highlight is Wirewood Symbiote. What does that guy do? That's the one that lets you pick up an elf, right? You untap a thing.
It's a really messed up card. It's an insect for 1 green mana. It's a 1/1. And the cost is return an elf you control to your hand. And the effect is untap target creature. They can't respond to you bouncing the elf. It just disappears. And
oh my God.
Lets you tap your elves for mana multiple times. Lets you bounce them, after you block or in response to removal.
Okay. So, well, Klug wanted us to note that there is Bloodbraid Elf and Rish Karpima Renegade in the deck, and those are fine cards to pick up and recast over and over and over if you get a Wireword Symbiote. So those are the two tribal decks. Another deck that's in here is Mono Blue Devotion, thanks to Jeremy Dizani, I would suppose. Payoff-wise, you actually only get two big Mono Blue Devotion payoffs, which is Thassa, which is very good, and also Master of Waves, which is also very good. But you get a lot of blue-centric cards in the set that you can now just easily cast if you end up being effectively mono blue. Cards like Cryptic Command and Night Veil Spectre, Jace, the Mind Sculptor, yes, that one. Counterspell, blue, Factor Fiction, that kind of stuff. And blue is still just great. And then also, I found out the hard way today, Luis, that Illusions of Grandeur and Donate are in the cube together. Thanks to probably Kai Bude.
That is a combo. So one of that reminds me of one of the things that it seems a little more unique about this cube is there's actually kind of a lot of terrible cards in the cube that combine well with other cards. So like you do get shades of that in Legacy and Vintage cubes where Pestermite, Deceiver XR, Splinter Twin, Kiki are this like, A plus B combo. But at least those cards are a little bit more useful than Illusions of Grandeur and Donate. Like these cards, Donate is 2 in a blue, give your opponent one of your permanents. You would never put this card in your deck unless you have Illusions of Grandeur. That's the 3 in a blue enchantment, enters the battlefield, gain 20 life. When it leaves the battlefield, lose 20 life, and has cumulative upkeep of 2. So every turn it gets 2 more expensive. You donate it to your opponent, and when they can't pay, they lose 20 life.
Which happened to me, by the way, today.
One of the most busted decks in history, by the way. This was a old busted deck. But both halves of that are just such garbage. So you need to combine them, and they're very good, and you combine them. But this cube has a lot more of that, right? Like you can open up a pack and see Glimpse of Nature, Cranial Plating, Donate, Diregraph Colossus, and just be like,
Splinter Twin.
What is going on here? So
seriously.
So I think this cube is really fun. At least I've had fun the first couple of times, but there's more air than in most cubes because of the restriction of, you had to win a Pro Tour to get into the cube.
That's right. A couple more decks. Miracles. Basically, the blue-white control deck just gets all the normal stuff that you would expect: counterspell, sweepers, removal, that kind of thing. But you also get cards like Terminus, Temporal Mastery, and Entreat the Angels. And you get to enable them with cards like Sensei's Divining Top, Preordained Brainstorm, Scroll Rack, and Jace the Mind Sculptor. A couple other notes here. That's it for the main archetypes that he highlighted in his article. But he did have a couple of notes. One of them is on Planeswalkers, which has become a major archetype in most cubes. Is just, I'm going to draft the 5-color or the 4-color Planeswalkers deck because they're just so powerful. There's actually only 17 of them in this 540-card cube versus 33 in the most recent Magic Online Vintage cube. So, in my mind, they're more rare. Planeswalkers are still super powerful, and I would really not sleep on them. I would try to get as many as I could, which sometimes is a strategy in the other cubes, but you also feel like, well, I can get them when I want them because there's so many in the cube. But here, that's not the case. And then the other thing is the creatures. It's a little bit interesting, but many of the creatures from way back in the day, they suck. When people were playing Illusions of Grandeur Donate, they weren't exactly running out these sick, streamlined creatures, alongside these things. So you get some of the powerhouses you'd expect, but boy, there's some random morphs, unmorph it, destroy an enchantment. There's like a 2/2, reach guy or something.
Dark Sanctifier.
Just like a bunch of
Archer.
Just like, and there's like White Knight isn't like actual card White Knight is in here. And that just means that the low end of your creatures is probably going to be pretty low. But Klug actually recommended lowering your standards a little bit for the bottom end of your creatures rather than saying like, I'm just not going to play these. He said, no, like they're relative to the other cards in the set and they're actually okay.
Well, one of the things I've noticed is removal is actually a little better than it is in most cubes. Because people are playing kind of crappier, smaller creatures, so cards like Pyroclasm or Arc Lightning have a little bit more action than they would normally.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then the last note, the lands. So again, since these weren't just chosen, normally when people make a cube, they go, well, which duels do I want? They go, okay, well, I want the original duel. So they'll just take all 10 of them, right? They just make it in there. Well, you had to earn your way into this cube by winning a Pro Tour with this in your deck. So they're not all there. So the way it panned out is all 10 color pairs do have 5 dual lands available to them, but they're not the same collection of dual lands. So for example, some of the original duels aren't even in the cube. Like there's no Underground Sea, Taiga, Bayou, or Plateau. And instead, those are like the best you can get are the Shockland counterparts for those. But some of the color pairs get both the Shockland and the original duel, for example. And then there are fetches. And then what do we call those tap fetches? Those old ones that don't cost you a life, but they enter the battlefield tapped?
I don't think there's even a name, but these are cards like Bad River and God, what are they even?
I don't know.
I know the name of Bad River. There's like the Mountain Valley.
Flood something,
Floodplain, yeah. These ones, Rocky Tar Pit, and whatever the white-green ones, Grasslands, I think.
Yeah. So these are in here too, but you're going to want to make sure that you study up a little bit just so you know, like, hey, if I take this floodplain, what are the actual duels I can get in my color pair? Because some of them don't have like even 2 searchable duels or whatever, with the basic land types on them. So keep that in mind. The cube's been cool so far. I don't really have a great feel for it, only 2 drafts in. But I've liked seeing some of the cards that you don't like, Scoot Mobs in this cube. I'm like, yeah, I remember that guy. That thing gets +5/+1/+1 counters in your upkeep if you control 5 or more lands. And it's just a 1/1 for 1. Like I love old cards like that just really haven't found a home in any format. And somehow, by the way, what deck had Scoot Mob in it that won the PT?
I was trying to think of that when I saw the card earlier because every card has won the Pro Tour. But yeah, that card's pretty bad. So
and that was like in my era. Like I was playing Magic when Zendikar came out. Like we were doing the podcast.
I top aided a PT with a Scoot Mob in my deck, but I did not win that one.
Maybe nice. What was yours? Was that in your Naya deck?
You could get it with Ranger Vios.
Oh, of course. Ooh, now we're talking. I like that. Anyway, so check out this cube. Let us know what you think. I'm curious if this kind of wacky, build construct on it works or not. I think it does, actually. I think it ends up being kind of a offbeat cube, but it has enough of the beats to keep people happy, where it's not like you're doing something totally insane. But also has enough weird stuff to say, oh, this is different. This isn't your everyday cube, and I think that's a pretty cool combo. Okay, that's going to do it for this one. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. And I want to thank our sponsor once again for help making this show possible, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all your needs Magic related. Make sure if you have cards to sell, you go to them. And if you want to get more product, sealed product, singles, whatever it is, you'll get 30% bonus if you trade the cards in for store credit rather than get cash. And that is a mighty fine deal. And it can really help you keep playing this game that we all love. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next week.
So one of the cool things about going to a Pro Tour is I always get some new situations for Genius or Grifter. Turns out when you're playing for high stakes, people get creative with what they're willing to do and the lines they're willing to take.
This sounds good.
So here's situation number 1. Your opponent is on the play. Both of you have chosen to mulligan. Both of you keep 6, and your opponent goes land, Chromatic Star.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, hold on, I haven't scryed yet. Remember, both players mulligan. The opponent goes, oh, I guess I missed my scry. What happens now? And you're like, well, you missed your scry, but I guess we call a judge. The opponent's like, yeah, I want to call a judge just to see what happens.
Okay.
The judge comes over and is like, okay, what happened? And it's like, and rules that both players get to scry.
Really?
And you're like, well, your opponent admitted they missed their scry, and the opponent did admit that. Like, literally, it was like, because this happened against us. It actually, Mike Sigrist was the person that it happened against. So I was just watching this. And the opponent played a land and played a spell. Like, tried to take their first turn. Clearly, they just missed their scry. The judge ruled that because not very many actions had elapsed, they didn't miss their scry.
Wow.
Turns out it was also the head judge, so he couldn't appeal. The opponent got to scry. Do you think that's Genius or Grifter on anyone involved? Like, where would you put this?
Is there a neither? Like, I don't know. I would do this. I would call the judge and ask myself.
So The opponent was definitely not grifting. Not a genius because they missed their scry, but they were not grifting.
Yeah.
They were grifting. Like they admitted, like, yeah, I missed my scry. You know, they went to play their card. They called a judge, which is well within their rights. Nothing wrong there. Siggy, I think, did nothing wrong either. Like, he pointed out as soon as the opponent tried to play a spell, like, you know, because the guy went land spell like in one motion. As soon as that happened, he's like, hold on, we haven't resolved the scries yet, you know, and I think you missed yours. I think that's all totally fine. Mm-hmm. It turns out the judge actually grifted us. The judge, after the match, came back and apologized and it's like, yeah, that was the wrong ruling.
Oh, no. Do you know what the ruling was supposed to be? Was it just supposed to be that the player who missed their scry?
Clearly missed their scry. There's no, they made every indication that they missed their scry.
Including just saying those words. So
including the words, I missed my scry. So, okay. I mean, it happens, but it was kind of funny. That's not normally where that goes. All right, two situations here. Your opponent plays Chalice of the Void for 1 against you. Mm-hmm. You're playing Blue-Black Death Shadow. Coincidentally, that's what I was playing in the Pro Tour.
Oh, God, this sounds bad for you.
Very bad. Your deck's all 1-drops. Well, yeah. So you've got a Gurmag Angler in your deck. It's got Delves. You want cards in your graveyard. So you just start casting 1-mana spells. Also, you know, your opponent could let them resolve. It's their Chalice. Mm-hmm. Is it genius or grifter to confidently go like, end of turn brainstorm and just look at them?
Genius.
Genius?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What if you cast brainstorm and immediately go to grab your 3 cards?
Oh, I don't like that so much.
Yeah, I think that crosses the line.
That's a little much. You're really kind of pushing them, but I would just say brainstorm and then let them say, sure.
My opponent correctly chaliced all my spells. So,
that sucks. Yeah. You didn't get one through, huh?
No, not a single one. So, game 2, they play Chalice for 1 again. Mm-hmm. This time, you're prepared. You have Throne of Geth, which is an actual card we cited in. It's a 2-mana artifact. You tap and sack an artifact to proliferate, which means you can select any permanents with counters on them and add another counter of that type. And you proliferate the Chalice up to 2, which means your deck's now free because you have all 1-drops. And often their deck is now restricted because decks with Chalice that have no 1-drops tend to have more 2-drops than average.
That is so nasty, by the way. Yeah. Well, it's just so disgusting.
That part's genius, but that's not what I'm asking about.
Okay.
So now now your opponent has a Chalice for 2 out. Is it genius or grifter if they start running spells in to see if you'll catch the Chalice trigger?
Oh, wait a minute. I think that's grifter. Like, they have to say that themselves. Like, even if you just said sure, like, they can't let it resolve, right?
Correct. To be very clear, none of my opponents did that, but it would have 100% been grifter. When it's your own Chalice, you are not allowed to forget the trigger. Like, obviously,
nobody did that. Obviously,
someone can forget the trigger. Like, people play spells into their own Chalice all the time on accident. Mm-hmm. But intentionally playing a spell into your own Chalice and not saying anything about the trigger is most definitely a grifter move.
And that's just straight up cheating, right? Like, you could get disqualified for that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even close. The last one is you're playing against Blue-White Teferi. They've exiled all your permanents with a Teferi emblem, but their only win condition is to loop Teferi over and over again. Okay. And deck you. You're playing the Turbo Fog deck, which is already probably grifter to begin with. I mean, come on, Turbo Fog. You have decided your game plan is to discard Nexus of Fate. This is the much discussed buy a box promo. Yes. Which says if it would go to the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into your library. And so your game plan is just discard Nexus of Fate every turn. Your opponent can then -3 Teferi every turn. Is this genius? And keep putting it back on their deck so neither player can deck. Is this genius or grifter on either player's part?
Yeah, I think it's genius on the Nexus of Fate player's side. Like they forced a draw where they couldn't win.
Yeah, and as far as I understand it is a draw because neither player can advance the game state. Mm-hmm. I don't think either player is forced to do something other than the one action they can take to prevent themselves from decking.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, the other player's only choice is what card to discard because they have no permanents.
Right. And at some point, the Teferi player can either -3 Teferi to not deck or just concede the game. But I don't think they're forced to. So I think
that's actually a pretty creative way to get out of the primary game plan.
Also,
from
force them, just put like a torrential Gearhulk in your deck or something. Just win the game like a normal Magic player. But yeah, those are some of the interesting scenarios that came up. There have been a couple more too, but I'll save those for later. So
yeah, well, we've got Pro Tour Hall of Fame voting season, so there's plenty of Genius.
Oh yeah. Just log on to Twitter. You'll see Genius or Grifter every single day.